Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dan Murphy and this is Talk Tech to Me. Today you're going to learn how to monitor your IT systems effectively, discover what GoldenSignals are, how to look for them, how to interpret them. This video will explain latency, traffic, errors, saturation, and how to build a culture of observability for your team and your organization. So without further ado, let's get into it.
My name is Daniel Murphy. I'm Head of Site Reliability Engineering, or SRE at PwC. And first and foremost, I am not a software developer. Gasps, I know. I am aware of my audience and who I'm talking to, but this talk came about after a 12-month engagement with a branch of the government. Not the same one Simon was talking about, a completely different one. And essentially during that 12-month engagement, I implemented an SRE team and I implemented a brand new SRE strategy and observability platform for the organization. So I wanted to reflect on that, and I wanted to bring it to everybody here because it's applicable to everybody, not just large government organizations, but even to small startups. Today we're going to talk about what is observability, what is SRE, what are GoldenSignals, and why are they important to us. We're going to talk about the strategy involved in developing an observability strategy, the tactics then to implement that strategy, and finally, that lovely R word, whose responsibility is all of this? I'm going to drop some truth bombs on you. I'm getting old. I'm turning 40 this year, and I've been in tech for about 20 years now. What that means is, I like to think of myself as being old school. Whenever I first started my tech journey, it was all physical servers. There was no hypervisor, there was no cloud. Everything was individual boxes that done an individual thing. Whenever I first started, I was working for a small startup that was running websites for people, and each individual web server was on its own individual box in a giant data center. Database servers then were completely separate boxes in separate rooms then as well, and cables ran everywhere. And that's where I got my start in the IT industry. So I understand whenever you want to monitor things, and whenever you want to sort of build things, you had to start from the very scratch. You had to start with the fundamental components. And observability is an awful lot like that. Times have changed. VMware came in, things started getting smaller and more compact. Then eventually the cloud came, and then multiple clouds came, and now we moved to more of a microservices-based architecture. So the entire observability pattern has changed completely. The traditional 4 metrics are no longer relevant. Latency, traffic, errors, and saturation. Whenever you look at the modern cloud then as well, you're no longer looking for these 4 signals. Also, things have become so integrated with each other. If you're running an e-commerce platform, possibly the greatest metric of success is, do customers get to the checkout with all the items in their cart? Or do these checkouts not happen? Do items drop? Does the customer experience diminish? That is untrackable through these 4 metrics. So the metrics for success for you and your organization are completely different to the way they used to be. So we now need to reevaluate what actual success means for your organization and how that can be tracked through observability. The first thing you need to start with is strategy. Hands up, who knows what their company's observability strategy is? Keep your hand up if you wrote that strategy. Yeah, 0. Okay, I was sort of expecting that. Not many companies have actually sat down and decided to define this because observability has always been the infrastructure team's problem or the cloud team's problem. It was never everybody's problem. So when you want to sit down and define observability strategy, you need to get everybody involved. And I literally mean everybody. If you're running e-commerce platforms, you need sales and marketing. If you're running a Salesforce platform then as well, you need to get legal. You need to get everybody involved. It's no longer just the infrastructure team's problem or the software development team's problem. It's everybody's problem. So you need to get everybody around a table. You need to start defining what the objectives are of the organization. Now, they could be the business objectives, they could be the growth objectives. If your company's objective is to hit $1 billion turnover, well, how is that broken down into key components that we can actually achieve on a daily basis? Comprehensive instrumentation. We all like to use the latest and greatest tools that are out there. Are your current tools fit for purpose? Maybe you're on sort of the basic plan, but if you move to the premium plan, you'll actually get a new tool set which actually will fulfill your requirements then as well. So reevaluating what tools you have, whether you're going to a multi-tool strategy or whether you're trying to consolidate onto one platform. Centralized logging. I think this got mentioned earlier on. I'm a big fan of centralized logging and monitoring. If you can bring all your logs, all the important things to one place, you're going to have a far better chance of being able to understand what's in there. If your SOC is maybe done by a third-party provider, if your software development team is split across the world then as well, and there's bits and pieces all over the place, it's more and more difficult to monitor that platform. So yes, I would highly suggest moving to a centralized logging and monitoring platform. CloudNative first, it really depends on the industry. The 2 use cases I've seen recently where people have actually gone away from cloud is large language development. It's extremely expensive when you run on something in AWS. So people are now actually buying physical hardware, physical GPUs, sitting them into a little corner somewhere and letting them process away and develop the models. The other one is defense. There's still an awful lot of contractors and defense contractors out there that don't want to go near the cloud. They still see it as far too risky. So define whether you're going to be cloud native first or whether you're going to have sort of a blended approach or whether you're going completely offline. Correlating context. Goes back to sort of centralized logging then as well. Is everything you're doing correlatable? Have you defined what good is for your organization? Have you got historic data you can compare against? If you're a new startup and everything's new and green, well, there's going to be absolutely new context for you to base upon. But if it's an existing organization that has years worth of data, do you actually understand what good is for your organization? What that existing baseline is? Only when you have that can you start sort of measuring yourself off that. I want to read these sort of left to right because the stuff on the right I would sort of see as higher level functionality. It's the stuff you can only really attempt once you've got the basics right. So moving to an AI first observability strategy is never going to work if you haven't underlined your baseline characteristics and what you want to do as a platform. Automation is extremely helpful when it comes to observability and monitoring, but like I said, unless you've mastered the basics, there's no point going to AI first strategy. And last but not least, and by far the hardest one to change in any organization, is culture. As I mentioned earlier on, observability was something that was typically done by the infrastructure team or the platform team or a team somewhere that you didn't deal with on a daily basis. Changing the organizational cultural structure and the way that people think about observability to make it be an observability first is extremely hard to achieve. I'll talk about it in a few seconds, but some ways you can go about achieving this. So once you've defined your strategy, really what have you done? You've built a Word document that's going to sit on a SharePoint site and gather proverbial dust. It's absolutely useless unless it's put into practice. And how do you implement strategy? Tactics. Tactics are the physical things we can do to implement a strategy and make that actually happen. Now, your tactics are going to vary massively depending on what your strategy is, but I tried to list them in these rough 4 categories and sort of talk through them as best I can. Objectives, tools, automation, and culture. So how do you define what your objectives are? Well, during your strategic phase, you would have got all the key stakeholders around the table, and you all would have said what's important to you. And then you take it a step further then as well. So how do you break that down into objectives? Well, it's workshopping, it's brainstorming. You're going to see what's important to them, and how does that all fit towards the overarching organizational goals. You want to get back to being documentation first. Now, I don't mean that's documenting your code. I mean documenting what you're doing or why you're doing it, so that you can give that to somebody else and they can understand exactly what you do and you can understand what they do. And that doesn't have to go back to being manual documentation of everything. AI tools are fantastic for that. But at least we want to get back into the old ways of doing things where everybody was fully aware of what everybody did. And prioritization then as well. You're going to have your goals, you're going to have your KPIs, you're going to have your SLOs, you're going to have your team's goals, you're going to have your organizational goals then as well. Which takes precedence? We all want to build new things and we all want to push new products to the market, but how often do you actually take a sprint out to go and fix some of the fires in the background? Spotify is one of the greatest examples of this. They took a year off, they built nothing new for a year. Instead what they did, they went back and fixed all the old stuff so that they could accelerate longer in the future then as well. So what is priorities for you needs to be aligned with the overall priorities of the organization then as well. Right tools. There's hundreds of tools out there in the market. I spent the last 12 months implementing Datadog, which is premium, enterprise grade, but it's expensive, like hilariously expensive, 6 figures expensive. If you're unsure about your tooling, run some POCs. Contact any of those vendors. They will bite your hand off for the opportunity to get into you and your organization. They'll give you free licenses, they'll give you free support, they'll physically come to your office and help you there as well. Run as many POCs as you can to evaluate as many tools as possible for you and your organization until you find the one that fits you. Open source versus off the shelf. Unfortunately, PwC is hilariously risk averse. We very rarely get the chance to use open source software. We typically have to go with companies that will sign an NDA agreement with us and will sign our own legal paperwork. But if you're a small scaling startup, absolutely open source is the right tool for you. They're far cheaper, they're quicker to get implemented as well. You're not going to get that premium level of support, but if you need something cheap and nasty, it's going to fulfill that requirement for you, absolutely go with open source. But it's something you need to discuss and it's going to fit in with your overall strategy. Integrations. I read statistics recently. I think we interact with 18 different products on a daily basis. I might think that sounds a bit ridiculous, but think about it. After you've done your day's work and you're sort of logging off, how many tabs have you got open? How many bits of software actually run on a daily basis then as well? If you're going to pick an observability tool of choice, it has to integrate with as many of them as possible. There's no point buying something off the shelf that doesn't integrate with your Slack channels, or you're going to buy something off the shelf that's not going to integrate with PagerDuty and your alerting platform then as well. It needs to be relevant to what you are doing. Automation. Automate as much as possible. Observability platforms require a lot of manual maintenance to get them up and running, and once they are up and running then as well, nobody wants to go back in and fix their alerts and monitoring. It's boring, repetitive work. So automate as much as possible. And a lot of the tool choices will directly affect that then as well. Also, integration into your monitoring platform then as well. So if you are using like PagerDuty or Twilio for out-of-hours alerting then as well, pick a tool that can automate as much as that's possible. Lots of the cloud platforms now actually come with built-in fixes and pre-maintenance and precursor checks then as well. If you're running something like Kubernetes then as well, you can build fault tolerance into that. You can auto-scale, auto-switch to that as well. So have an automated first mindset. AI then as well. Again, there's no point doing AI unless you've mastered the basics. So if you are going to go down the route of AI then as well, make sure it fits in with the overall strategy and your company's ready for it. If you look at something like Datadog, some of its AI features are amazing. When I say amazing, it has like a low-code platform where you can sort of type in plain English, build me a pipeline that will integrate with this new Kubernetes cluster and deploy it as Terraform. So anytime you build Terraform in your cluster, it's going to automatically add that onto your dashboard for your Datadog. So you can see everything new that gets created automatically gets put into that. Also, what it brings in then as well is a level of sanity checking. If you are running a Kubernetes cluster and has 20 nodes in it, and your tolerance is maybe it can lose 5 before it alerts to somebody, well, if it loses 5 in one go, it's still within tolerance and it's not going to alert you. It's only ever loses that 6th. But a human seeing 5 nodes go down all at once would say, that's suspicious, there's something going on here. AI tools are now getting that wee bit smarter, that bit more human, so they can start detecting some of this stuff. Moving on then, culture, as mentioned before. One of the hardest ones to change in an organization. It's one of those changes that needs to happen across the entire organization at once. There's no point having the engineering team saying, we want to change our observability culture, and the senior leadership are bought in. It needs to come top down, bottom out, bottom up, and middle out. The whole organization needs to be on board with it. How do you do it? Training and workshopping, whether that's bringing in third parties in as well to help you with this, or whether it's by getting your development teams to sit around the table with the DevOps team and sit around with the leadership team and get everybody on the same page then as well. We need to change our mindset. We need to, well, it's essentially, it's shift left, like we done with the security industry and we done with the DevOps movement. The same thing is happening with observability now then as well. Knowledge sharing and blameless postmortems. SRE, one of its key pillars is a blameless culture. If something goes wrong, it's not that engineer's fault, that thing went wrong. It's the organization's fault for allowing that mistake to happen. If you don't build in those guardrails where you're not allowed to deploy directly from your test branch to your production branch then as well, mistakes only happen because we allow mistakes to be made. They're typically never the engineer's fault. Engineers don't set out to make mistakes. They only make mistakes where they're allowed to make mistakes. So when things do go wrong, it's important that we move away from a blame culture. That if you do something wrong, you're going to get fired because of that. Whenever you're in that kind of culture, nobody wants to innovate. Nobody wants to try. Nobody wants to do something that they think might benefit the organization, but the consequence of that could be they get fired. We're heading towards a recession. Our jobs are precious to us now. So nobody wants to enter into any kind of activities that might lead to getting fired. So we're going to stay safe and not innovate. So we want to move to a culture where it's possible to innovate and we can do whatever we want, but with those guardrails built in. So once you've got your strategy in place, once you've implemented your tactics then as well, you're starting to get lovely rich metrics feeding into your organization. You know all the business objectives and have now got lovely metrics sort of feeding into them as well. It's only at this point can we really define what our golden signals are, what the key elements that define how well we as an organization are doing and we as a business are doing. And these typically have a little litmus test. So every time you have something coming in, you want to compare it against these sort of 5 metrics. Is it relevant? Are you getting information that is relevant to you and your job and what you're doing? If it's not relevant, it needs to go somewhere else. Is it accurate? Or is the payloads that you're getting within your observability monitoring platforms actually accurate, or is it far too vague and generic? Actionable. Are you getting alerts they actually understand? Or are you getting 500, an error occurred? Are you getting alerts that say, C drive on web server 4 is full, please sort it out? That's the kind of thing you want to be getting. Is it measurable? I talked earlier on about baselining, having that historical baseline data underneath. If you don't have that baseline, you can't understand what's good or bad for your organization then as well. So you always need to measure it against something. And last but not least, goes out saying timely. Are you getting them as and when you need them? This lovely R word, whose responsibility is this? Observability is finally getting the recognition it deserves. For a long time, the security industry was in the exact same situation, and then eventually there was this movement with shift left, where security is now at the forefront and is now embedded into everything that we do. You as developers, it's now your responsibility to embed observability in anything that you do. So if you're building an application, is the application measurable? Is the application observable? Are you going to understand what's good or bad within this application once it goes live? Or are you building something in a black box and you're deploying it to the world and you don't care about it then? Gone are the days of fire and forget or throwing the pig over the fence or whatever analogy you want to use. I think I'm at time. So I want to summarize this. If you are to implement golden signal tracking and observability strategy within your organization, you start with strategy. You bring your key stakeholders around the table and you get them all involved. You then take that and you devise your tactics, how you're going to implement them into reality. And only then can you define what your golden signals are.
So I hope you enjoyed that. And to summarize, hopefully you've learned what exactly observability is and why it's important, the strategy involved in developing an observability environment and culture, the tactics then to implement that, then what and how you can define what is golden to you in your organization. What are your golden signals that you should be receiving? And last but not least, the overall responsibility for this and who should actually be implementing this and doing this as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below if you have any questions or if you want to connect on LinkedIn. I'm Dan Murphy. This is Talk Tech to Me. Have a great day.